So I think we stopped last week right as you were called into the ministry. What happened from that point? How did you start taking those first steps into the ministry?
Our pastor at our home church at that time had gone to school at Fruitland Baptist Bible Institute in Hendersonville, North Carolina, and he wanted me to go up there. So he took me up for a day to view the school and check it out. And it was in spring, late spring, early summer. And I went up there, and I was so impressed with the school, I went ahead and registered for classes in September. And
Of what year?
Of 1983.
Okay.
And so I went back home, and I told Patty, I said, it just, that's just where I'm supposed to be. I said, in fact, I went ahead and registered for classes in September. She said, that's good, but who's going to pay the bills?
How are we going to pay the bills? Yeah.
I was working 2 full-time jobs at that point at home, and I was going to be leaving both of those jobs and going to school.
Now, what were you doing? Did we talk about that last week?
Yeah, we had a poultry house, and I drove an egg truck for the company that we grew chickens for to haul eggs from the farms to the hatcheries. And then I worked full-time at my brother's seafood restaurant. Plus, we had farming interests. We had tobacco and a few had cattle and that kind of stuff. So
yeah.
Patty was going to be left with all of that while I went away to school. So I went to school Tuesday through Friday. I leave on Monday afternoon late, going up there, being in class Tuesday through Friday. I did get a part-time job while I was up there working in a steakhouse. And Patty was pulling double shifts in the steakhouse at home and taking care of the farm. And
2 small children.
It just worked out. God made it work. And I left a lot of days going to school with enough gas to get there and not sure how I would get back home. But there was always somebody that provided, and that we made it work for 2 years. It was short 2 years after it was over, but it was a long 2 years while we were going through it. So.
Now, what was your reaction when all this came about and he was going to be going off to school and everything? Was there ever a point where you moved with him? With it?
No, we didn't move, Rick. We had too many obligations at home. As Eddie said, we were working on the farm with my daddy. Remember, Daddy had bought Eddie the tractor. We were farming, had an acre of tobacco at that time, and we had built our poultry house. So somebody had to take care of the chickens, somebody had to help in the tobacco, somebody had to take care of our cows. We had a few beef cows at that time. I've nursed baby calves that their mama wouldn't let them nurse, and had to bottle feed them and take care of them. Lost one time, just was in tears. But it was a difficult time, but in our hearts we knew that was God's will. Early on in ministry, Eddie claimed the verses, Proverbs 3, 5 and 6, to trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding.
Yep.
In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will direct your path. And Eddie was so convinced this is where God would have him go, and it definitely was. I mean, in all of his theological training, he left there after 2 years and went to Wingate University to finish his 4-year degree, and then to Southeastern Seminary to get his master's degree. And through all of that, he said nothing prepared him more for ministry than those 2 years at Fruitland. But the hardest thing was, I think, for me as a mother, was him leaving and our 2 small children. Angel would have been 6. Mm-hmm. She would have been 6, almost 6, and Corey would have been 4.5. And, it's kind of hard to explain to little ones, Daddy leaves on Monday and you're not going to see him again till Friday afternoon. And one of my most vivid memories is on Monday when Eddie left. The next morning when we got up, Corey wanted to know, is it Friday? And I was like, no, it's not Friday. But he would go and sit on the front porch with his little chin in his hands, waiting on his daddy to come home. And but anyway, Friday finally would come, and this is before cell phones, and we had to pay for long distance on our home phone. So as Eddie's already mentioned, I mean, there was an expense to going to school, and he wasn't working his jobs during those days, and financially, it was difficult. I was working double shifts a lot and taking care of the farm. But with that being said, we never had a bill that went unpaid. I mean, we had family. My daddy that ran the little country store, a lot of times when Eddie would stop to tell them, okay, I'm on my way, Daddy would have him fill up the car with gas, be sure he had that gas. And then, like Eddie said, either somebody would hand me some extra money at the restaurant. I had a great aunt who was wonderful about that, bless her heart. My grandmother had passed away at that time, and her sister, when they would come to eat with me at the seafood restaurant, she might give me a $10 bill. And I would say, Aunt Mary, you don't need to do that. And she'd say, I'm not doing it because I need to. I'm doing it because your grandma would want me to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, there were many people that God used to help provide.
Some we didn't even know.
Yeah.
At Fruitland, you go to school for 7 weeks. You have a 1 week break, and then you come back and have 3 more weeks to finish the quarter. At the end of the 7 weeks, if you're not current on all you owe the school,
Tuition.
They would come around to your classes on that 8th week when you went back, and they would call your name. They'd have a envelope to hand you and tell them how much you owe, and it's got to be paid before the end of the quarter, or you don't get your grades. And I'll never forget, I was in a reading class with Miss King, who was a retired first grade teacher that taught to us adults like first graders. But they came around the class and they started calling their names and called my name, and I got my letter, and I knew I was expecting it. But I opened the letter and it said paid in full. And I went to the president of the school and talked to him about it. I worked for his wife in the library. I worked in the library as well as the part-time restaurant job. And he said, you wouldn't know who did it, and he doesn't want you to know. He just comes in and gives money for students that need it. And it's just God's provided in miraculous ways. But before any of that schooling started, I had to go back and finish high school. My dad died when I was in high school, and I dropped out of high school to help with support the family. And so I went back and finished high school, and nobody in my family had ever been to college. And so I was the first one, but God just worked it out for us.
Oh, another miraculous thing that happened, Rick, when we built that poultry house, we built 2. My mom and dad had one, and then Eddie and I built the second one. And our family borrowed about $250,000 to do that. When I say our family, us and mom and dad, our family. And Daddy did not like to be in debt. So all the income that was coming in for those chicken houses went back to pay that loan off. A loan that was supposed to take, was it 12 years? I think it was 12 years. We paid off in less than 7 years. But during that time, I mean, the only thing we would get would be maybe $150 a month that would cover the electric bill for the poultry house. And during that time, my daddy called me one morning and said, on my way to work, I needed to stop at the store. He had something for me. And I said, what is it, Daddy? And he said, Piedmont Farm Credit, who we had the loan with, he said, what was it called that we would get back? Some kind of a dividend that we got back because we were members of that Piedmont Farm Credit. And Daddy said, there's a check here for about $1,600. And I'm thinking, okay, a check for $1,600. 2 of my sisters were in on that second chicken house too, and I'm thinking, okay, there's going to be dividing that 4 ways. That's going to be about $400. That's awesome. I mean, $400 was a lot of money. And I stopped down there, and Daddy handed me a check for for $1,600. And I said, Daddy, and he said, everybody gets that. We each, because we're members, we each got a dividend check for $1,600. And that paid for a quarter or full? I don't remember. But it paid for a lot. We were so excited. But nobody was expecting that. It was just like out of the blue that came. I mean, every time there was a bill, I mean, we didn't get to do a lot of eating out or doing anything like that. I mean, it was a tough 2 years. But boy, did God ever come through with flying colors, as he always has in the last 40 years.
Yeah. Yep.
Now, once you graduated and got your master's and all that, you said that you went to where'd you go to seminary?
Southeastern Theological Seminary.
Where is
Wake
it?
Forest.
Wake Forest. Okay.
Wake Forest.
Okay. All right. Once you got through all your school and got done with your education, how quickly did you land at a church?
I started pastoring a church in my last quarter at Fruitland.
1985.
And I pastored churches the whole time I was in school at Wingate doing my bachelor's degree and when I was doing my master's degree, and commuted to school 103 miles.
Now, you said that you pastored churches.
Yeah.
I mean, were you interim even then?
No.
Or were you the...
I was a full-time senior pastor at Sulphur Springs Baptist Church for 6 years. And when we moved from there, I had finished my bachelor's degree at Wingate and then went to Mount Airy to Fellowship Baptist Church. And we stayed there for 13 years, and then following that, while I was there, I did my master's degree work, and then after I finished there, I went to Virginia as director of missions, and then back to Stanleyville in Winston-Salem for 13 years, and that's where I retired, ending up 40 years in ministry.
Awesome. You know, I enjoy talking to you out in the narthex, you know, just right before church and everything and asking questions. And seriously, how many sermons have you preached over the years?
There's no way to count that. I guess I could go back and count how many weeks it's been, and that wouldn't count for revivals and stuff, but thousands and thousands.
Yeah. And ministry never stops, Rick. Even when he said he was going to try to slow down a little bit. I mean, he's just turned 72 years old, and at Stanleyville, it is an older congregation, and lots of people sick and shut-ins and things like that.
Made 2 pastoral care visits yesterday.
Yeah, yesterday we went to my aunt's funeral in Troutman, North Carolina, and after the funeral we came back, went to King to visit a lady that was a member at our church in Mount Airy that we were very close to. And then from there we stopped and made another stop to visit a couple in a previous church. I mean, ministry just never stops. Eddie was telling me about Thursday when we took Jared for a neurology appointment at Baptist Hospital. He dropped Jared and I off at the main entrance so we could go on up and get checked in, and he went to find parking because parking's at a premium at Baptist right now. And he said as he was coming through, he saw an older couple, and he said they looked like they were kind of lost, didn't know where they needed to be. And he said he just asked them if he could help them. And Eddie knows his way around Baptist, all the hospitals, really, really well because he did chaplaincy training there during his ministry training. And he said when he asked the couple if he could help them, and they shared where they wanted to go, and Eddie was telling them, and he said, the lady asked you? Mm-hmm. Well, you go ahead and finish.
Yeah, and I was telling her I knew my way around the hospital because of doing chaplaincy training. I was a pastor. And she said, could you remember my husband? Said he has colon cancer. And I talked to her a little bit and asked, about how advanced it was. It's still confined to the colon, so that's a good thing. And I just thought and prayed with them in the hall in the walkover from parking deck to the hospital. And she was in tears when I finished the prayer.
It's really just amazing how God opens doors, though. I mean, when I'm with Eddie at the hospital and we get on the elevator and somebody steps on with flowers or a bag, they're going to visit, and Eddie just asks, do you have somebody in the hospital here? A loved one? Do you have a loved one? And it's amazing how many prayers have been prayed on the elevator from the floor you get on till the floor whoever gets off. So
Yeah.
ministry is always opportunity knocking.
Now, how many kids you have? 3?
3.
3. 2 daughters?
Nope.
No.
2 sons.
Two sons.
and
One
a
daughter
daughter.
and 2 sons.
1 daughter and 2 sons. All right. How did your older 2 kids deal with moving around a little bit?
Well, they weren't excited about it. They were kind of like we were. I never wanted to leave anywhere we left, but when we got to where we was going, God always blessed. Now, when we made the move from Hidnight to Mount Airy, Angel was going from junior high school to high school, and Corey was going from middle school to junior high. And she told us, she said, y'all can move to Mount Airy if you want to. I'll live with Mama and Papa and stay in school here. But she's the only one that's still in Mount Airy.
Yeah.
And that's where she raised her family. And all of our kids graduated in Mount Airy school system, and that was a God thing. It's been a blessing for us.
But Rick, our children, apart from
So did she actually stay in Mount Airy?
Yes,
Yes,
she married
yeah.
in Mount
She
Airy.
married in Mount
She
Airy.
married. Her husband is principal at Mount Airy High School.
Okay.
And but it was always amazing, not just to see God working in Eddie's life or in our life in ministry, but to watch our children grow in the Lord, because they would see what God was doing. And as I started to say, apart from our salvation and God bringing us together to do ministry together and to do marriage and life together, our greatest blessing would have to be our children and our grandchildren.
And when we were making that move, Greg Mathis was the one that recommended me to the church in Mount Airy. And I was talking to him about it, and I said, Greg, I'm not sure I want to move. He said, Eddie.
Now, you were moving from where to?
From Hidnight to Mount Airy.
So your daughter was going to stay in Hidnight?
Yeah, she was.
That's what she
All right.
said.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And I was talking to Greg about it, and he said, Eddie, he said, you pray about it, just whatever the Lord leads you to do. But he said, think about this. He said, what if the person that God has intended for Angel to marry lives in Mount Airy and you don't go? And when we went, the person she was to marry did live in Mount Airy. And they're married, and
They'll be married 25 years next week.
They have 4 children, and all of them are in church and active, and they've done well. We're so proud of all of our children. They've all done amazingly well.
So when did Jared come along?
Jared is 9 years younger than Corey. Let's back up to Corey just a minute, because we can't leave him out. We're very proud of that young man too. Corey is a big cut up. He's our family clown. He will keep you in stitches. He's now in his 13th year as pastor at First Dobson. I believe that's right, 13. And but even as a young child, all the mischief that he could get into, we could still sense there was something special in Corey's heart. He would want to have a family devotion, or he would want to be the one to pray, and it was during our time in Mount Airy at the church there, as he became an adult, graduated high school, he actually volunteered the volunteers that were working with our youth group up there. And during, and I can't remember the exact year, but one summer during camp, Jared was with the youth group. Corey and Eric and Ann, our youth directors at that time, had gone to a youth camp, and those boys called us one night And Corey was on the phone. Jared's not much for talking on the phone, but Corey was on the phone, and he told us, we think we had him on speakerphone, that the Lord was working in his life. And he said, I'm not sure if it's to pastor a church or what kind of ministry, be a missionary, what it is, but I feel God's call on my life. And on that same phone call, Jared had accepted Jesus Christ as his Savior at that youth camp. And so like I say, Corey ended up following in his daddy's footsteps. He went to Fruitland Baptist Bible Institute, where Eddie started Fruitland in 1983. Corey started Fruitland in 2003, 20 years later, graduated in 2005, and one of Eddie's greatest joys, and this doesn't typically happen, that...
It's only happened one time.
That's the only time it's happened, but Eddie was actually able to speak and preach the address at Corey's graduation at Fruitland. So Corey went on from up there to Mud Creek Baptist Church, where Dr. Greg Mathis was pastor, and served as intern for a while, and then they called him on staff to work with their children and youth, and he was up there probably, 6 years, 7 years, where he met his bride. She was actually on staff at the church at Mud Creek, and like Eddie said, Angel and Jason have four of our grandchildren. We have grandchildren from 5 to 25. Christopher, Evan, Elizabeth, Rhett, Davin, and then little 4-year-old Caroline. 5-year-old Caroline now. She's turned 5. But we're so thankful that all of our children are involved in ministry. Corey and Amy at First Dobson. Angel and Jason are very involved with their church family at Bannertown in Mount Airy. Angel sings with the praise team and so on there. And then, of course, Jared's with us everywhere we go and doesn't like to miss church, does he? No. He's very committed as well.
Now, I don't know what this says about me, but I want to hear about the mischief that Corey got into.
Oh, I'm not sure you do.
I don't remember whether it was his first day at the junior high in Mount Airy.
Very early.
Very early. He pulled a fire alarm on a dare. Somebody dared him to do it. And
they called us and asked us to come to the principal's office. I'm not sure.
And that's the first time Patty'd ever been to
the principal's office.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how many times I went.
Corey is he was a great kid. He just didn't, Corey didn't see the need to apply himself in school as much as Angel did. Angel graduated 3rd in her class at Mount Airy High School. And it was flip-flopping back and forth. 2 of the doctor's sons in Mount Airy and Angel. One would be number 1 one week, and then it would flip-flop to one of the others. But Corey, all through high school, he would say to me, Mom, if I graduate high school, because Angel was talking about going to college and where she would go and so on. He said, if I graduate high school, I don't want to hear this about college. I'm not going. And I would teasingly say to him, there was never any doubt he was going to graduate. He was an above average student, but he wasn't that very top of the class that Angel was. But anyway, I would say to him, Corey, if you graduate high school, you're not going to hear me say a word. And he didn't. When he graduated high school, he was already managing 2 of the Subway stores in Mount Airy. And his boss was just thrilled with the work ethic that Corey had and so on. But then when the Lord called him to preach and he knew he had to go back to school, long story short, he went on and did his master's degree too. He worked very hard. And I said, Mom didn't have to do that, but God did. So he's a good kid. One of the funny things, though, is when we're together as a family, Thanksgiving or what be it, when he pushes back from the dining room table and he says, Mom, did I ever, it's usually, Mom, did I ever tell you about the time? And I'm just cringing thinking, okay, it's confession time. But he's never done anything. I mean, we've never had to get him out of jail or anything like that. Usually it's just mischievous things that he likes to pull on people.
I think Corey may be my favorite. I've never met him.
You would love him. You would love him. He's been on cloud nine this week. Davin, our 10-year-old grandson, has been in D.C. playing in the Southeastern Regional Conference of the Cal Ripken baseball, and they lost in the semifinal game yesterday, 5-4. But he's
had a good tournament.
Yeah, it was a great tournament, good experience. But his dad's very proud of Davin for that. Very proud of both those boys. They're great kids.
Jared, he's obviously had an uphill climb, I think.
He has had an uphill climb. When Jared was 4 and diagnosed with the autism and so on, we were immediately told after he was tested at Amos Cottage in Winston-Salem. We had gone for preschool screening at Tharrington Elementary School in Mount Airy. And during that screening, one of the advisors, she was actually an occupational therapist at Mount Airy School System. And Rosemary came back out and she said, I'm really suspicious of autism. I really think he may have autism. Had trouble concentrating, focusing, that kind of thing. Anyway, they recommended that he be tested. So we spent all day one Monday having Jared tested at the Amos Cottage in Winston-Salem. And when they came out that afternoon, and one of the therapists took Jared into another room, but as the doctors began to share with us, they began to share of all the things that Jared would never do. Number one being, he will never go to the public school system. You need to look for alternative education. And Rick, it was devastating. Eddie will tell you I cried all the way from Winston-Salem back to Mount Airy that night. But this is a God thing too. Our women's group, our WMU group and fellowship was meeting that night at the fellowship hall, and we lived in the church parsonage, just a short walk up the sidewalk to the old fellowship hall there. And Eddie had asked me, he said, are you going to the WMU meeting? And I was crying. I said, I can't go. He said, honey, our church family's been praying. They're going to want to know what we found out today. So he carried Jared in the house. Jared was so exhausted from all the testing that day that he had gone to sleep coming up the road, and Eddie carried him into the house. And I tried to compose myself, and I went up to the fellowship hall, and when I went in, you could hear a pin drop. The ladies were sitting around the tables and so on, but you could hear a pin drop. And Miss Ola Edwards, the greatest prayer warrior I've ever known, little lady about so tall and a little white bun on the back of her little gray head, just a sweet saint of God. Miss Ola said, what did the doctor say? And I began to share with them through tears what the doctor said. And I'll never forget this because I think it was the greatest moment that we had in all this. She took me by the hand, and she took the other lady that she could reach by the hand, and she said, those doctors, maybe they don't know the God that we serve and what he can do. I got holy bumps just thinking about it right now. But she got all those ladies, there maybe was 15, 16, 17 ladies in the room that night, got us down on our knees, and she prayed like I'd never heard anybody pray in my life. She could do that anyway, but it was extra special that night. And long story short, Tharrington had recommended that we put Jared in an accredited preschool. Jared would have been 4 had he started kindergarten that fall because he's a September baby. And so we had already talked about holding him back just because he was a boy, just because he wasn't really interested.
September what?
September 19th.
Okay.
September 19th. So he would have just been right before the deadline to get in. So we thought that was a great idea too. So Jared went for the next year to Central Methodist Church, the only accredited preschool at that time in Surrey County, and did pretty well. Mm-hmm. So impressed his preschool teacher there with the things that Jared could do that she decided she was going back to college to get her teaching degree. And when Jared started school then in kindergarten, the next fall, Teach, who works with autistic students in North Carolina, recommended that he have a one-on-one aide just to kind of help out in there. And so Dale Whitfield, his preschool teacher at Central, had gone back and gotten enough of her courses that she qualified to go and be his aide in kindergarten. And Miss Becky Kiesler, Lord bless her, she was the one that said to us when he was rescreened, she said, if you can talk the school system into letting him come in, I'm willing to take him into my classroom. She saw something in Jared too. And once he finished kindergarten, they came to us and said, we would like for Jared to be tested. We feel, he's really good in math. We would really like for him to be tested. So we went to the Greensboro office at Teach, and they tested Jared and came out and they said, your son is really gifted in math. And we said, yes, we know. And they said, no, we don't think you do know. He's just tested third-year college level in math, doing things that he doesn't even understand what he's doing. We're talking Rain Man. And we had never seen the movie at that time. Of course, we watched it. Yeah. But for the doctors that told us he would never go to public schools, Jared went on to graduate very high with honors in his class at Mount Airy High School, went to Surrey Community College, graduated magna cum laude, and then only because we were a little concerned about him going away to a 4-year school, not because of anything we felt like Jared would do, because if it's a rule, Jared's not going to break it. You're not going to get him to do something he knows he's not supposed to do, but just because of his mother's fear of what somebody else might try to do to him. And so during that time, he started having the epileptic seizures. But so he's never driven. He had taken his driver's ed training in Virginia while we were there and made 97 on his bookwork test. And so then we saw we were moving to North Carolina, and we said, well, we'll wait till North Carolina and get your license. But then he started having seizures, and he's never been 6 months without breakthrough seizures. So driving is not an option. But he went on to graduate at Winston-Salem State University, magna cum laude again, with a degree in mathematics, and has now been at his job at the corporate office at Amar for 17 years.
Now, what's he do there?
Oh, Rick.
We really didn't understand what he did, so we asked his supervisor in Lawrence, Kansas.
Yeah.
We asked him to email us exactly what it was Jared does. He emailed it to us, and we still don't know what. We're still
not real sure what Jared does. Complex. I've got it on my phone from the email, but during that time too, Rick, I mean, it was just amazing to see how God worked all of that out. All right, here it is. This is what Steve sent back to us. Jared does very good work and is very well liked. He works on some complex projects that require technical input and understanding to transfer a concept to a configurable spreadsheet that outputs data that a layperson can use. So you probably understand that, but we're not real sure.
Well, thank you for making me feel that much more stupid.
I just assumed you probably knew, Rick.
No.
But how he got this job, Rick, that's just a God story, too. Jared was finishing up at Surrey Community College, and actually at Mount Airy High School, and because of the autism and so on, vocational rehab picked up Jared's case to try to help find a job that would be suitable and this kind of thing. And so his counselor there, her name was Diane. Diane called me one day, and she said, Patty, have you ever heard of Amar Garage Doors? And I said, I sure have, because we had a church member in Mount Airy that actually drove to Winston to work at the corporate office there. And she said, the strangest thing has just happened. The secretary at the Voc Rehab office had gone to the restroom. The phone rang, and Diane, Jared's counselor there, answered the phone. and it was the HR person at Amar in Winston-Salem. And she said, his name was Patrick O'Sullivan. She said, Patrick said, I'm looking for a kid that might be gifted in math. And she said, oh, do I have the kid for you? And so long story short, they flew Steve from Lawrence, Kansas to Winston-Salem to interview Jared to bring the computer program that Steve had written that he was looking for somebody to do. That was on a Friday. They interviewed Jared, sent that little computer home with him, and said that they had a 2-week project that they would like to hire Jared to do, which made no sense to me, Rick. I said to Eddie, that just seems ridiculous to me that they would go to the expense of flying a supervisor from Kansas to North Carolina to interview a kid they want to do a 2-week job. Why don't they just use one of these engineers and give them some overtime? And Eddie said, honey, if this doesn't work out with Jared, that's their easy out. He's finished the 2-week project and he's done. And so on Monday, Aaron, his teach coach from Greensboro, came up to go with him to the office to make sure, he had what he needed, to make sure Amar was happy with what was going on. And so on Monday morning, about 11:30, 11:45, she called and she said, Patty, I understand, you're just a mile away. That's how close it is for Jared to go to work. She said, if you want to come pick him up and take him to lunch, I understand. But she said, I'm here. I have to be here anyway. I'm happy for Jared just to go with me and we can chat and, I can get to know Jared a little better. So I said, okay, sure. How's he doing? And she said, well, he's working really, really hard. And I said, does he seem to know what he's doing? And she said, well, I don't have any idea because I can't do what he's doing, but he is working very hard. So I took comfort in that, called Eddie at the office to tell him. And then about 1:15, the phone rang again, and I answered, and it was Erin. And she said, Patty, we've run into a little problem. Rick, my heart sank. I just knew, okay, he's not going to be able to do this. And I said, oh, Erin. And she said, well, the little 2-week project that they had for him to do. And I said, yes. And she said, just before we left for lunch, he finished. And I said, what do you mean he finished? And she said, he says he's done. I said, with the entire project? And he said, yes. I got those holy bumps again. And I said, has he done it correctly, Erin? And she said, well, that's just it. The engineers here in the Winston office, they don't know this program that Steve has written. So they have sent it back to Kansas for Steve to look over. And that was a little over 17 years ago. And he's still there working for Amar.
Awesome. Well, listen, we could sit and talk for hours and hours, but I do want to ask about Maplewood. What do you see? What do you see in Maplewood's future? Where do we go from here?
Well, we came here a year and a half ago, and I sensed that it was just a church that was hurting. People have been through a traumatic event. And we've spent the year and a half just trying to heal, to prepare for the future, to do some organizational stuff, and I think all that's been done well. Since when I came here in worship, there was a tenseness because of the hurt. I think most of that is gone. I feel a much better spirit in our worship and the music and the preaching and everything that's happening. And I think Maplewood has a very bright future. In the 2 years that I've been here, the 2 young men that were on staff are doing amazingly well. Of course, Drake's been called to serve a church in Mount Airy. In fact, the church that I served in Mount Airy for 13 years, and is doing very, very well there. And Curtis is able to get out and preach in a lot of different churches, and looks like that in the near future he may be pastoring church, and we're just excited for both of them. So it's just God working, multiplying the ministry here, and in working what contact I've had with the pastor search team, I think the church is looking forward to getting a new full-time permanent pastor on board, and I see a bright future for Maplewood. I really do. Got a great location, great facilities, and great potential to grow and to do great kingdom work here in Yadkinville area.
If you're looking for a church home,
if you want to be part of a family,
if you're looking for a place to grow,
if you're looking for a place to worship,
if you have questions about your faith,
if you'd like to talk to somebody about being a Christian,
come see us at Maplewood.